Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Enterprise Dish, a perfectly timed episode because earlier this week, Microsoft held a Windows Developer Day, and there is no better person on the planet to talk about Windows than Mr. Aaron Suzuki. How's it going, Aaron?
Greetings, going okay, going okay. We're surviving a very wet winter.
Yeah,
It's not stopping. I don't think it's going to. Warm and wet.
at least you're sort of warm. We've been living on the fringe of about 33 degrees Fahrenheit, I would call it. So that's about like half a degree Celsius. So there's a lot of moisture coming through. We never know what form it's really coming down in. Sometimes it's snow.
Interesting.
And sometimes, like today, it's actually raining outside. And yeah, it's been a wet one.
Yeah, so here, the interesting thing has been the volume of rain. Seattle's rainy, everyone knows this in the world, but it's just that when it's been raining, it has been a deluge, and there are still flood warnings. Like we've had a couple days off, which has been spectacular, and saw a little bit of blue sky and a little bit of sun here and there, which has also been amazing. But the rain's coming back, and even with these couple days of dry, there's still these flood warnings, and they're having to open some dams because of the volume of water entering the reservoirs,
Wow.
which is then sort of deliberately doing small-scale downstream flooding to avoid more catastrophic problems. So it's really quite serious. The other challenge is the snow level's actually been quite high, which for a person with my interests has been particularly distressing because the skiing around here has been not very amazing.
Really?
And because of the volume of rain, they've been having landslides that have closed the roads that you take to get to the ski hills. So it has been sort of double trouble, and I don't know. I mean, you come to expect the unexpected living in Seattle, and this year has been no exception.
Yep. You can't see it, but this is projected up from my laptop. But the image behind like my desktop wallpaper is just like bright, beautiful spring flowers. Like I am very much in the same boat as you. Not quite literally in a boat because it hasn't rained that much here. But I'm looking
Seeing
forward.
yourself there mentally, emotionally, I'm just envisioning this brighter, happier world, right?
Yeah, like we're at that time of the year where I'm looking forward to doing yard work. Right? Like I don't mind getting like, oh, I got to get outside and cut the grass. That'll be great. Now, bring that up in the middle of July or August, totally different story. But at this point, looking forward to those bright flowers coming back. But Microsoft actually dropped us some nice little, I'll call them
Little
early spring nuggets.
I'm really so you attended the event, right? I mean, I
I
just
did.
read all the news.
Yeah, well, they streamed it virtually, and I've watched every session, every single thing that they did, and they gave us. I think we all kind of knew this was coming because Microsoft had sort of kind of been putting containers into Windows 10 for a while. They had sandboxing of certain browsing experiences, detonation of links, and all that stuff. But Microsoft officially came out yesterday actually, and said, "Hey, look, we are bringing Win32 containers to Windows 10X. Every app that is running on Windows 10X is going to be in some sort of a container." And I'm curious what your gut hot take reaction is. Obviously, we don't have great hands-on with it yet, other than the slides and stuff Microsoft just talked about. But I'm curious how you perceive this information.
That is a great question. I mean, so we've tried to take this kind of layered architectural approach, and the way it's executed varies depending on the layer we're talking about. So in our case, and what kind of got Smart Deploy on the map was kind of the full modularity or the modular treatment of device drivers, which really solved this extremely painful problem of hardware independence. And people tried to solve it a million different ways. And in classic Microsoft fashion, they sort of just said, here is a platform with which you can tackle this problem. And they didn't really make it this discrete manageability, or rather, they left the platform so wide open, it's almost too discrete and granular and manageable. So this ability to package drivers in kind of a modular fashion was left up to people like us who would go and make those, or other organizations that would put a massive blob of every driver in the known universe together to help try to solve that problem. I feel like maybe in a way, this sort of containerization strikes at the same objective, which is really to kind of put these pieces into manageable parts so that serviceability changes, right? And that's exactly what they talked about. if I understood correctly,
Yeah.
and remind me if this was right, that if I understood this correctly, that like patching, for example, would happen, sort of in a layered way. There would
Yep.
be no, right? Isn't that right? Isn't that what they
Yep.
said?
Yeah. Reboots
So
are patching in under 90 seconds, I think is what they're calling it.
so goes the promise, right? And
Right.
and they also promise that core Windows 10 would have some of those same benefits from this sort of twice a year
Hmm.
service strategy. And I mean, they weren't promising specifics like 90 seconds. There's probably a very good reason that they made that statement, right?
Hmm.
And that's coming from some engineers who have, designed this in such a way that it could be done that way. And it makes me wonder if, the modularity of it makes it so that you can sort of address it independently, and then on restart, you're
Hmm.
running on the new platform, so to speak,
Hmm.
right? And maybe that's the 90-second strategy, is that it's really a minutes or hours long exercise that's happening in parallel, and then you sort of cut over. If it's really that modular, that's how it could work,
Yeah.
right? So for us, from an imaging perspective, that's how our world works. We don't care what's under the surface, no pun intended. That you really could have a literally Surface device, or a Lenovo X1 Carbon, or whatever it might be the case, and the image is the same, and it doesn't matter, and the deployment process and time frame really is only dependent on the media that it's reading or the network it's running over, and
Hmm.
your processor and drive speed, right? So it could very much, ideally, it would be the same thing, right? I mean, there's a reason we're trying to do this. We're trying to
Yeah.
drive it all the way up the stack, and it doesn't work exactly the same layer for layer, right? At least not today, which raises a whole other good question of why only Windows 10X?
Right.
Why
This
can't
is
this be done on Windows 10? Why are we still kind of doing it the old way despite the promises? And this is, part of the conversation I had with Mary Jo, in one of her podcasts was, hey, it's the new way, but really the old way,
hmm.
right? I mean, if we're being honest. So at what time will those converge, or is the proposal here that 10x is going to be the new way, and 10x is going to take over? But 10x is sort of mainly the multi-screen thing, isn't it? I mean, am I thinking about this right, Brad?
So that's the way they're pitching it right now. So for everybody wondering why there was just a slight cut right there, for some reason Skype introduced an echo. We don't know why. Just a quick little reboot, just like everything else in most of the Microsoft world, sort of fixed it. But I believe, Aaron, you were talking about why are we only seeing this on 10X, or is 10X kind of the foldable dual screen thing? Is that
Right.
yeah?
Yeah. And so this is exciting. This is
Hmm.
a really great thing that is sitting in front of us. But this is not mainstream Windows 10, and that world seems to be kind of on its same linear trajectory. And so will this, I don't know, management approach or architecture or both flow down into Windows
Hmm.
10, or is Windows 10X, going to start taking over devices? Is that the belief,
So there's
in future
based
view?
on how they position. I think there's a couple things we can infer. I think to your point, at some point this is going to come off of foldable devices. If they have 32-bit app containerization technology that works really great, it makes absolutely no sense. I think they're doing it on foldables because one, it's going to be a low volume product. They can kind of build it out in the public and do all that. But there's a couple things that we picked out of the weeds that are actually going to make some of this a bit of a challenge. For example, I think like all high-end applications, like your video editing, your CAD software, and all that stuff, is not going to run well in a container. We also know that some games will not work either because of anti-cheat technology. Antivirus software will not work in this type of environment. So I think at some point and in some scenario we'll see it, but I don't honestly ever see Windows, at least not yet, given the stance of it, Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise like fully going away.
Sure. I mean, it's almost like Windows 10X is the iOS to sort of the
Hmm.
Mac OS that is Windows,
Yep.
full scale Windows. And that's how I was thinking about it too, Brad, is that so much of our customers' use case now is different, in the sense that Windows is used for hard work. And so, and it might be that, and we were seeing more customers do this too, where their imaging strategy is playing out because of this modularity and this ability to move away from device-based imaging. They're making it sort of role-based imaging and saying, hey, I can manage this more discreetly and do more at a kind of IT support use case level if I make an image for finance that's separate from HR, that's separate from engineering, that's separate from sort of just core knowledge workers. And we're seeing people take that approach rather than saying, okay, we've got 5 or 6 different device types that we manage, therefore we have 5 or 6 different images that we manage. They're saying we have a history of 5 or 6 devices. We're adding 5 or 6 more devices. We have remote and mobile workers that have sort of a de facto BYO strategy. In order to contain it all, we have to manage now 20 different devices. And we have all these different roles that have all these different loads, and we don't want to do it, the kind of prescribed modern way of leaving it up to the management solution of laying down a generic baseline and letting essentially the MDM service take over and put the load on. We want to have it sort of all dropped in a more or less singular monolithic payload. Awesome. That's a perfectly entertainable situation. But I guess what I'm getting at is what that workload consists of is not sort of these lightweight, dashboardy consumable things. It's really the real stuff of real work, whether it's, like you were saying, some kind of, design software or some kind of, high-end editing software or something that's very connected and policy driven in such a way that you want local execution, or if it's a security sensitive situation, you want that control. You don't want it abstracted away. So that's what we're seeing. And for that reason, I tend to agree that we might, this might be a strategic move to have sort of this iOS universe that is your sales team that really just needs quick access to CRM and productivity and communication tools. Teams is probably fine to work out on, Windows 10X. That they're going to make a nice 10X, flavor of all the Office 365 stuff to work for that, just as they've done for iOS and Mac OS and everything else. After sort of marginalizing that at one point in time. Now here's an opportunity to play directly to that. So it'll be interesting to see how this works. Also, in that world, if it will be sort of the way that the Dynamics is on mobile, for example, where you don't exactly have the same views. It took us a long time to get the same dashboard views on mobile that we have on the desktop. We have that now. So it might be one of those things where in time it does converge and we are seeing more and more. But will the full suite of high-end Adobe products be supported on 10X? I mean, I don't necessarily see that. What about all the Dassault apps and Temenos and all these kind of high-performance things that thousands of businesses globally, large enterprises as well, rely on to keep their kind of core business running and functioning?
I absolutely think we will see 10X in the consumer long before we see it move upscale. Right? Because that's
I could also see the enterprises, as we often do, adopting 10X devices, but for more the consumer use case, right? The low power, USB powered, I can charge it in the seatback entertainment on the airplane, like we've talked about in the past.
Yep.
I can do these basic productivity tasks, and so an organization will buy 500 or 1,000 of them. Distribute them widely, but the real work still gets done on a device that is managed and patched and, addressed, secured, the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. We are in the very, very early days. Microsoft is just now putting out some documentation, some flavors that people can start to play with, but I don't think really anybody has had any solid chance to, one, vet what they're saying, right? They're saying all these great things, 90-second reboots, everything's in a container. That's all good on paper. We got to make sure and vet that that's actually the path forward in the timeline. They're saying, hey, we're going to see the first instance of this in the fall. we'll see. We'll see. You know,
Sure. And meanwhile, the emulator now, right?
yep.
Was the emulator just announced or released yesterday?
It,
I think
w-
it's out.
yeah, it was released yesterday afternoon.
Yeah, so people can start devs can start, monkeying around and seeing how this is going to work and start
Hmm.
having some fun. It looks like really it's going to kind of be a multi-screen experience, not unlike what I use day to day.
Right.
But the emulator will tell a lot of tales about what it is to code against this and against this platform and how far you can take it. The emulator may have some deficiencies and drawbacks and inconsistencies with the way that
Hmm.
10x actually works on real hardware. But I also think that they probably put a lot of discipline into, making it something that's going to be
Yep.
usable for devs hopefully for the long haul. So
Yeah, we should get hopefully an update. At least the next logical timeline would be Microsoft's Build Conference, which takes place at the end of May. That would be where I would expect to hear them talk, hopefully,
I
quite a
think
bit
that
about it.
that is it's a prediction to take to the bank. I
Yeah.
bet it's going to be tons of 10x at build, and it's going to be amazing, dazzling demos and lots of the kind of dialogue we're having here.
Hmm.
But less than the arm waving sort of what ifs and much more in the here's what you get kind
Hmm.
of context. So that'll be a lot of fun and probably a different cast of characters telling the tale there as well
Yes.
than the folks who've been speaking to it to this point, right? Much more the dev managers and program managers speaking to it and demoing it versus sort of the VPs and others kind of making the more grandiose announcements. So
Yep.
it'll be good. Yeah, it'll be a hot one this year.
Yeah, so we've got that on the horizon, and then looking in the rearview mirror, just slightly, maybe a week or so. There was a fun outage last week, which sent a lot of people, myself, a little nerve-wracking. That there was an outage with Bing, and it effectively broke local search, which wasn't a great time.
Yes, right. So this was sort of a funny one where we were all scratching our heads internally
Yep.
saying there is not actually a local search engine on my device that lets me do this. I don't just get a kind of go like Windows, my local instance of Windows is dependent on some Azure service.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, that's really what's going on. And
Yep.
so, yeah, Bing was down, but what does Bing run on?
Right.
So this is sort of a wake up call to all of us who think that Windows is not as connected as we think, that when we run offline, we have everything available to us. Well, I think in time we're going to see increasingly that we're dependent on a lot of these back end services, and
Hmm.
we're making the same bet Microsoft is on Azure, albeit via the OS itself. It is a little bit interesting. How did it affect you, or was it just sort of one of those head scratchers for
Oh
you?
no, it definitely impacted me quite a bit actually. The funny thing was it impacted me even post Microsoft put out a fix and they said, "Hey, it's all fixed." And my machine was not actually fixed for about 48 hours.
Ah,
The interesting thing, which I don't understand why, is so the service it's called like Search UI service and the processors. Mine was moved to suspended, and so restarting and everything else didn't actually fix it until I went in there and manually disabled and then re-enabled it. So,
interesting, interesting.
yep.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a surprise that it went down, and the reason why got our attention.
Hmm.
The other sort of unrelated but similar topic issue that was also fixed in, I guess, the late Jan, whatever that last Jan set of updates was. I mean, maybe it was just a KB, but was Explorer.
Oh
Like
yeah.
File Explorer search had all these
Yep.
problems since 1909 was released.
Hmm.
And I'll tweet out what that KB is so listeners can see it
Oh
for
yeah.
themselves. But some really bizarre behavior, and if you installed 1909, you basically couldn't use Explorer Search until you install this patch. Um, I only started running 1909 recently,
Hmm.
and I only seldom use um, the File Explorer search, so it didn't impact me. But I did occasionally see the Phantom Gray box appear in some of these other really bizarre scenarios, and it didn't affect everyone, but we saw it internally reproduced it on a couple of people's devices, including our CTOs. So sort of interesting that they would let some of these really obvious
Yep.
bugs linger as long as they did, which maybe suggests that there were some bigger bugs and bigger problems that were also being addressed. But it's good that that one's resolved.
Yep.
Something pretty usable.
And then one that's still, or I guess it technically has been resolved, but it's not a great resolution, is when Microsoft put out their final patch for Windows 7, they introduced a minor bug that kind of got rid of the wallpaper or
Yeah,
stretched
yeah.
it, or
That one's funny and goes back to sort of what we're talking about of the quantity of people still running Windows 7 and what you're kind of left with, and whether or not Microsoft's really going to spring to make these fixes, and you know what is the long tail of this really going to be like, that what stated policy versus what's actually going to happen. And here we go, right? I
yep,
mean, I think we'll be having these discussions, I think, at least all year long, at least, and I bet into
yep.
2021 easily, of these kinds of things, and I bet they'll get more entertaining too. So this is, I would say, on the entertainment scale, this one's probably, a 7 or an 8. I'm waiting for the 10 on the entertainment scale, right? Of something horribly wrong that is relatively benign, but laughable all the same.
Yep. So
It's coming.
that's a fun one out there. Well, and I fully agree that there will be more of this, and I bet there'll be more Windows 7 patches. I mean, we still got Windows XP patches, I think, up until last year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, the question's liability, right? I mean,
right.
and I think that Microsoft it learned a hard lesson during that whole XP endeavor, and saw the risk. And in spite of, everything that, sort of the dark clouds that your colleague Paul's forecasting, I
Hmm.
think that Microsoft does pay a lot of attention to this. It's still a massive business, and the
Yep.
platform's the enabler for all the other even more massive businesses that are the future of it. So, it would stand to reason that they would selectively continue to support this,
Hmm.
to keep from, getting a lot of negative attention and getting some bad light on things that, you know, nothing is fast or cheap when you talk about Windows. Everything is very costly, and takes thousands of human hours to accomplish, just because of all of the dependencies and all of the interests at play. So I think that we laugh about this and we make jokes about this, but internally for Microsoft, these are all $1 million and multi-million, if not tens of millions of dollar decisions to
Yep.
decide to continue to make some of these support moves. But the downside risk for them is hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, from customers who are on their way and trying to do the right thing and adopting, but have important workloads that really they can't afford to have, any exposure on, and Microsoft knows that full well. So, yeah, I mean, it's gonna be interesting to see to what extent that and how long that gets entertained.
Now, Aaron, I know we started on a little bit of a doom and gloom, but I think your near-term horizons are probably slightly sunnier. I think.
Oh, we're gonna try to find some sun. We're gonna go to Hawaii, which is nice. And little known fact is I was actually born in Hawaii. I have no recollection of
Ah.
my early childhood,
Hmm.
um, being a Hawaiian, but I have no actual, like, Aboriginal Hawaiian blood.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's sort of a funny claim to fame. And so I actually didn't return to Hawaii until I was in my 30s. But since then, I've tried to get there more. And especially since living in Seattle,
Hmm.
they give students, and even the private schools follow more or less the schedule of the public school. And so all these families get this extra pre-spring break
Yep.
because it's such horrible weather. And this year, more than ever, it is a necessity. We're just losing it. So, yeah. I mean, it'll be a welcome break, and I'll report back, and maybe next webcast I'll have a much more kind of tanned glow about me,
Yep.
and some tales to tell of the exotic fish,
The
and
pineapple.
some
That's
sunshine. Yes,
the
exactly.
pineapple
Pineapple,
is that.
papaya, and all that good stuff.
Well, very cool. Well, wish you obviously safe travels. Slightly jealous would probably be underselling it. It's been too many, 3 years since I've been to Maui, and yeah, I need to get back there. Need to find a way to get back there. But to everybody else who's listening to this that is not going to Maui, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that when Aaron gets back, we can all be jealous of his adventures. And we appreciate everybody tuning in. Aaron, you taking your time. We'll catch all of you right back here next time.